This seat doesn't belong to you." The words rang out sharply, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. The airport noise vanished in an instant. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The steady shuffle of passengers boarding slowed to an awkward halt as heads turned one by one toward row 18. There, by the window, sat a 12-year-old black girl, frozen in place, clutching a wrinkled boarding pass with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Her name was Aaliyah. It was her first time flying alone. Her heart had been racing since she stepped into the terminal, but she kept telling herself she could do this. She was on her way to New York, selected from thousands of students to attend a prestigious youth leadership conference, a moment her father had told her could change her future forever. He had booked the ticket himself. Economy was nearly full, and the system had placed her in a first-class overflow seat, right near the front of the plane. Window seat. Paid for. Completely valid. But the flight attendant standing over her didn't believe any of that. She glanced down at the ticket briefly, barely long enough to read it, then looked back at Aaliyah's oversized hoodie and slightly worn sneakers. Her lips tightened into a thin smile, the kind that wasn't friendly at all. "Sweetheart," she said loudly, drawing even more attention. "First-class overflow seats are usually reserved for premium members. You'll need to move to the back." Aaliyah's stomach dropped. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice not to shake. "Ma'am, my dad booked this seat. This is my ticket." Before the attendant could respond, a second crew member stepped closer, eyes scanning Aaliyah like she didn't belong there. He let out a quiet laugh, just loud enough to be heard. "Sure he did," he muttered under his breath. A ripple of discomfort spread through the cabin. A woman across the aisle frowned, gripping her armrest. A man, too, rose back, stared straight ahead, pretending not to notice. Aaliyah felt her face burn. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't broken a rule. She hadn't done anything wrong. Yet, somehow, she was the one being questioned. She lowered her eyes to the ticket again, her fingers tightening around the edges. In that moment, she felt small, smaller than she ever had before. What no one on that plane knew was that her father had just landed, and he was walking toward the gate. The lead flight attendant waved her hand dismissively, as if the situation wasn't worth another second of her time. "Let's not hold up boarding," she said loudly. "You can argue with customer service later." Before Aaliyah could react, the attendant reached for her small carry-on, the one her father had helped her pack the night before, carefully reminding her where everything was. That was when Aaliyah finally spoke louder than before. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. "Please don't touch my bag." The words sliced through the air. Silence followed. Not the quiet of calm, but the heavy, uncomfortable kind that presses against your chest. Passengers leaned forward slightly. Someone coughed. Even the attendant froze mid-motion. She slowly turned back toward Aaliyah, one eyebrow raised high. "Excuse me?" she said, disbelief dripping from her voice. Aaliyah's hands tightened into fists at her sides. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "My dad told me not to let anyone take my bag," she said carefully. "He said everything is already paid for." For a brief second, no one spoke. Then the second crew member laughed, this time openly. "Your dad?" he said, smirking. "What does he do, hon?" Aaliyah didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she lowered her gaze back to her boarding pass, staring at the printed letters as if they might suddenly glow or rearrange themselves into something undeniable, something these adults would finally respect. Around her, the cabin shifted with unease. A man across the aisle rose slightly from his seat, his voice hesitant but firm. "Her ticket looks fine to me." The lead attendant turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. "Sir, please stay out of this." The man slowly sat back down, shaking his head. Aaliyah's eyes burned. Tears gathered at the corners, blurring her vision. She blinked hard, refusing to let them fall. She would not cry. Not here. Not now. Because she had learned something early in life. Her father had taught her that strength wasn't loud. That dignity didn't need permission. And that calm was a weapon when used correctly. He always said, "When people doubt you, stay calm." Truth doesn't need to shout. So Aaliyah stayed quiet. She stood there, small but steady, surrounded by adults who had already decided who she was before she ever spoke. The boarding line behind her slowed to a stop. A few passengers whispered. Others looked away, embarrassed. No one intervened again. The attendant sighed impatiently. "We don't have all day," she said. "Either move to the back or we call security." Aaliyah's breath caught. Security. The word felt huge, terrifying. Her hands trembled now, despite her effort to stay composed. She glanced toward the front of the plane, wishing, hoping, her dad was already inside. He wasn't. At least not yet. Just then, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will pause boarding briefly. We're waiting for one additional passenger." The attendants froze. Passengers looked up, confused. The cabin door opened again. Footsteps echoed down the jet bridge, slow, measured, confident. A tall man stepped onto the plane, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His posture was straight, his expression calm but alert. He scanned the cabin once, taking everything in. Then his eyes found Aaliyah. His face changed instantly. Concern, focus, and something sharper beneath it. He walked forward without hesitation. "Why is my daughter standing in the aisle?" he asked, his voice steady but commanding. The flight attendants turned. The color drained from their faces. "Sir," the lead attendant began nervously, "there's been a seating confusion." "No," the man interrupted quietly. "There hasn't." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and held it up. The screen showed the booking confirmation. His name, her seat number, every detail clear and undeniable. She's exactly where she's supposed to be. The second crew member swallowed hard. The man continued, his tone calm, but the air around him had shifted completely. "I'm David Carter." A ripple of recognition swept through the cabin. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Wait, Carter, the Carter Group? Isn't he?" David Carter, billionaire investor, a major stakeholder in the airline itself. The lead attendant's mouth opened, but no sound came out. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't yell. Instead, he walked to his daughter's side and knelt in front of her, meeting her eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Aaliyah nodded, her composure finally cracking just enough for a single tear to slip down her cheek. "They said my ticket wasn't real," she whispered. David stood up slowly. The cabin was silent. "Did anyone verify her ticket before humiliating her?" he asked. No response. "Did anyone treat her with respect?" Still nothing. The captain emerged from the cockpit, visibly shaken. "Mr. Carter, I sincerely apologize." David raised a hand. "This isn't about apologies," he said calmly. "It's about assumptions." He looked around the cabin. "My daughter followed every rule. She had a valid ticket. The only reason she was questioned is because she didn't look like what you expected." No one disagreed. No one could. David turned back to Aaliyah and offered his hand. "Let's sit down," he said softly. And for the first time since boarding began, Aaliyah smiled. Because truth had arrived, and it didn't need a shout. Just as the crew prepared to call security, the captain's voice suddenly cut through the tense cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be holding boarding for a moment. We're welcoming an additional passenger." The words landed like a pause button. The lead flight attendant froze, her hand hovering inches from the intercom phone. Passengers looked up from their seats, confused murmurs spreading through the rows. The aircraft door opened again. A soft mechanical hiss echoed through the cabin. Then came footsteps. Slow, measured, confident. A tall man stepped inside, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His shoes were polished, his posture straight. There was no rush in his movements, no arrogance in his stride, just a quiet authority that immediately shifted the atmosphere of the plane. He paused at the entrance, letting his eyes move calmly across the cabin. Then they stopped, locked onto Aaliyah. Something in his expression changed instantly. Concern hardened into focus. He walked forward, each step deliberate, the murmur in the cabin growing louder with every pace. He stopped just a few feet from where Aaliyah stood, still clutching her boarding pass. "Excuse me," he said firmly, his voice steady but commanding. "Why is my daughter standing in the aisle?" The question sliced through the tension like a blade. The flight attendants turned sharply. Confusion flashed across their faces, followed by something closer to fear. "Sir," the lead attendant began quickly, forcing a polite smile, "there's been a misunderstanding. This young passenger appears to be seated incorrectly." The man raised his hand gently. "No," he said. "She's not." His tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and tapped the screen once before holding it up between them. The display glowed clearly. Booking confirmation. Passenger name. Seat number. Everything matched. "This seat was purchased in full," he continued calmly. "Assigned by your system. Verified twice." The cabin had gone completely silent now. Then he added, almost casually, "I'm David Carter." The effect was immediate. A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere near the front. A man in business class leaned forward, eyes wide. "Wait," someone whispered. "Did he say Carter?" Another voice followed, barely audible. "The Carter Group?" Recognition spread through the cabin like electricity. David Carter, the billionaire investor whose aviation firm held a major ownership stake in the airline itself. A name that appeared in financial headlines. A man whose decisions reshaped companies overnight. And he was standing right there. The lead flight attendant's face drained of color. Her confident posture collapsed inward. The second crew member took an unconscious step back. Mr. Carter," she stammered. "We weren't aware." David didn't let her finish. "That much is clear," he said calmly. He turned toward Aaliyah and knelt down in front of her, bringing himself to her level. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softening instantly. Aaliyah nodded, though her lower lip trembled. "They said my ticket wasn't real," she whispered. David's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. He stood slowly and faced the crew again. "Did anyone take the time to actually verify her ticket before questioning her?" he asked. Silence. "Did anyone speak to her with respect?" Still no answer. Passengers watched, breath held. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others stared openly now, no longer pretending not to see. The captain emerged from the cockpit, his expression tight with concern. "Mr. Carter," he said quickly, "I sincerely apologize for this situation. This does not reflect our standards." David raised a hand. "This isn't about standards," he said evenly. "It's about assumptions." He gestured lightly toward Aaliyah. "My daughter followed every rule. She boarded when instructed. She sat in the seat she was assigned. Yet she was singled out." He paused. "Ask yourselves why." The silence that followed was heavier than any apology. The lead attendant looked down at the floor. David turned back to his daughter and offered his hand. "Let's sit down," he said gently. Aaliyah took it. As they moved toward their seats, something had changed in the cabin. Eyes followed them, not with doubt this time, but with understanding. Because everyone on that plane had just witnessed a truth far bigger than a seat assignment, and it was impossible to unsee. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult anyone. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to. Instead, he knelt beside his daughter, bringing himself down to her eye level, blocking out the rest of the cabin. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Aaliyah nodded, though her eyes still glistened. She hesitated for a second, then spoke in a small, steady voice. "They said my ticket wasn't real." David's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in restraint. He stood up slowly, every movement deliberate, and turned to face the crew. The cabin felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in. "Did anyone verify her ticket before mocking her?" he asked calmly. No answer. The lead attendant stared at the floor. The second crew member swallowed hard. David waited. "Did anyone treat her with dignity?" he asked again. Still nothing. The silence was unbearable. Passengers shifted in their seats. A woman near the aisle pressed her lips together. A man in the back shook his head quietly. Everyone understood what was happening, but no one could undo it. The captain stepped out from the cockpit, his expression tight, his voice cautious. "Mr. Carter, I sincerely apologize for this incident," he said. "This does not reflect our company's values." David raised one finger. "This isn't about apologies," he said evenly. The captain stopped mid-sentence. "This is about patterns." The word landed heavy. David turned slightly, his gaze sweeping across the cabin, not accusing the passengers, but acknowledging them. "My daughter followed every rule," he continued. She boarded when instructed. She sat in the seat assigned to her. She spoke respectfully. She never raised her voice. He paused. The only reason she was questioned, he said quietly, is because she didn't look like what you expected. No one spoke. The truth settled into the space between them, thick and undeniable. David took a breath. I've spent my life building companies, he said. I understand mistakes. I understand pressure. What I don't accept is discrimination disguised as procedure. He turned back to the captain. I'll be speaking with the airline's board tonight, he said. Effective immediately. The captain nodded once, solemnly. David then looked directly at the two crew members. You're done for today. No shouting. No scene. Just finality. The lead attendant's shoulders sagged. The second crew member's confident smirk was gone entirely. They stepped back slowly, exposed, not attacked, not publicly humiliated. Simply revealed. A senior attendant approached quietly to take over boarding. The process resumed, but the mood had changed completely. David returned to Aaliyah's side. You did nothing wrong, he told her softly. Not one thing. Aaliyah nodded, taking a deep breath as she sat back down. Her hands were no longer shaking. As David took his seat beside her, a woman across the aisle leaned over. I'm sorry that happened to her, she whispered. She handled herself with grace. David nodded politely. Across the cabin, something subtle but powerful was happening. People were reflecting, not on the authority of a billionaire, but on the calm of a child who stood her ground without anger. On the danger of assumptions made too quickly. On the silence that allows disrespect to pass unchecked. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, steadier now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will be departing shortly. The plane began to move. Aaliyah looked out the window as the runway lights blurred into lines. Her father leaned slightly closer. Remember this, he said quietly. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone. She smiled faintly. High above the clouds at 30,000 feet, a lesson had been delivered far more powerful than any announcement. Respect isn't optional. Dignity isn't earned. And truth, when spoken calmly, always lands. Aaliyah returned to her seat. This time, no one questioned her. No one doubted her ticket. No one asked her to explain herself. The cabin felt different now, quieter but not tense. Reflective. As the plane rolled down the runway and lifted into the sky, the city lights below blurred into soft streaks of gold. Aaliyah pressed her forehead gently against the window, watching the ground fall away. A woman across the aisle leaned over, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so proud of you. Aaliyah turned, surprised. She hadn't expected anyone to say anything at all. She smiled softly, a small but genuine smile that carried far more strength than words. Her father reached over and squeezed her hand. You did exactly right, he said gently. You stayed calm. Aaliyah nodded. She finally felt the tight knot in her chest begin to loosen. The fear, the embarrassment, the confusion, it all slowly drifted away as the plane climbed higher. For the first time since boarding, she felt safe. Weeks later, the story never made the front page, but change still came. The airline announced mandatory bias training for all staff. Public apologies were issued. Several internal policies were rewritten. A restructuring followed quietly, without fanfare. But the real lesson didn't live in press releases or corporate statements. It lived in that cabin, in the silence that forced people to confront their assumptions, in the calm strength of a child who refused to be erased, in the realization that authority doesn't come from uniforms, and dignity doesn't require permission. People learned that status isn't measured by clothes or appearances. That truth doesn't need volume to be heard, and that respect should never be conditional. As the clouds drifted past the window, soft and endless, Aaliyah imagined the city waiting for her on the other side of the sky. New faces, new opportunities, new challenges. She wasn't afraid anymore. She understood something now, something her father had always tried to teach her. She belonged, not because of who her father was, not because of where she was seated, but because she knew her worth. And as the plane carried her forward, higher than she had ever been before, Aaliyah smiled. knowing she belonged anywhere she chose to be.